Why do my boundaries keep getting crossed? If that's a question you keep asking yourself, then this is the video for you, because there is a good chance that there are 2 things you are not doing. Hi, my name's Mike, and if you're new to this channel, snap, so am I. This is only my 2nd video, and in this channel, my intention is to share personal insights, personal development hacks, things that will help you improve your interpersonal relationships, things that will improve your communication skills, and things of that nature, so stick around. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the 2 things that you are probably not doing which are causing your boundaries to be crossed. But before we can talk about those 2 things, I think it's important that you and I establish some alignment. And by that, I just want to make sure we're on the same page, because hey, people have different ideas or definitions of what a boundary is, and that's okay. Different words have different meanings and histories for different people. But I just want to make sure that we can have a meaningful conversation. So I'm going to define what I mean when I say boundary, and so that will be the distinction we're using as we move along in the video. So what do I mean when I say boundary? A boundary is something that you establish that protects or maintains a fundamental need. Now there's a key word in this definition. The key word. Can you guess what that word is? Never mind if you haven't guessed it or if you're not sure what it is, because I'll be talking about that in more depth a bit later on. But that is for me what a boundary is. That is how I define a boundary. And why is it important to be clear on what a boundary is, and why is it important to understand what we're talking about when we say boundary? To best illustrate this, I'll share with you a story. It's a story about a friend of mine. We used to be members of the same gym a little while ago, and she came up to me one day and she was like, Mike, my boundary was crossed again. I was at the gym and there was a guy whom I know, and we're friendly or whatever, but on this one particular day, he came up to me and he just kind of gave me a hug. And I didn't want the hug, and I was kind of in the hug and I felt uncomfortable, and he crossed my boundary. And I was curious about this because I wondered if her and I had the same definition of what a boundary is, because for her, what I imagine is that there was something that this person did that made her feel uncomfortable, right? He crossed some threshold of hers that caused her to feel uncomfortable. A need of hers was not being met, right? But this brings me on to the first thing that I want to talk about. And if you go back to the definition of a boundary, which is a thing that is established in order to protect a fundamental need, the very first thing that is probably causing your boundaries to be overstepped over and over again is the fact that it likely hasn't been established. And so in my world, in my view, a boundary isn't a boundary unless it has been established. If someone doesn't know that there is a particular boundary because you haven't established it explicitly, how are they going to know when they cross it or not? How are they going to know what the threshold is or not? And to really illustrate this point, let's look at some examples of other boundaries. All of these images that you see right now are examples of boundaries. There are things that have been established or put in place so that everybody knows what the threshold is. Everybody knows what overstepping that boundary is, right? So in this example here, if the traffic lights hadn't been put up, the drivers wouldn't know where the threshold is for them to stop their cars and where they need to stop. They wouldn't know. So the very first thing in order to ensure your boundaries are being protected and respected is that they are established. Just like in the example of the traffic lights, the traffic light had to be put up. The drivers had to know that, hey, this is a boundary. This is where I need to stop when the light is red. And so in order for your boundaries to be respected, they need to be established. And when you're dealing with other people, what I mean by established is simply to explicitly mention it. So going back to the example of my friend in the gym, when that person came and hugged her, in his mind, in his world, a boundary hadn't been established. So what I'd recommend my friend to do would be just to let him know that, hey, listen, I'm not comfortable with you just coming up and hugging me like that. So I'd prefer that you just ask me before you just jump in and hug me. Would that be okay? Right? In that moment, she has now established her boundary. She has said, hey, don't just come up and hug me, dude. Like, ask for my permission first, okay? So now he knows, he's aware of where that threshold is. He's aware of what her boundary is. Her boundary has been established. A boundary is not a boundary until it has been established. For me, this is a very key point, because this is one of the reasons why I feel people's boundaries keep getting overstepped, because the person who is overstepping the boundary simply doesn't know that it's a boundary, doesn't even know that this is a threshold, doesn't even know that you're uncomfortable. Sometimes when people have their quote unquote boundaries crossed, they might not even mention it. They'll go away and they'll feel uncomfortable. The person who overstepped that boundary won't even know that they've done that, and that's very unfortunate, because A, the person who feels uncomfortable hasn't even established their boundary for the next time, and the person who apparently violated their boundary doesn't even know that they've done so. And so it's vitally important to establish your boundaries. That's number one. The number two mistake that you're probably making is that once your boundary has been overstepped, you're not upholding it. So step number two is you must uphold your boundary. Going back to the example of the traffic light. The boundary has been established, there's a traffic light. Drivers understand that when there is a red light, they need to stop the car. If a driver goes through the red light and doesn't stop, then that boundary has been overstepped. It has been disrespected. Now, what do you think would happen if local councils or the government didn't put measures in place to uphold that boundary every time it was crossed? Well, drivers would just simply keep on going through red lights. They would never stop because they wouldn't take it seriously. And so what local councils do is they issue fines, right? The drivers get in trouble. There is a consequence for overstepping that boundary. It's vitally important. And it's vitally important because the driver will feel the consequence of having overstepped the boundary. Number one, they knew there was a boundary. It had been established. And now number two, now that they've overstepped that boundary, they know that there is going to be a consequence. They know that there is going to be some ramification for them overstepping that boundary in the way of a fine or something of that nature. So number two, it's vitally important that the boundary is upheld once it has been established. So in the case of my friend at the gym, let's imagine she went back to the gym. She's now established her boundary to this guy. She said, hey, listen, don't come and hug me without at least asking me first, because I just really don't feel comfortable with that. She's established it. She goes to the gym another time. He comes over. He doesn't ask for whatever reason, and he gives her a hug, right? Or he goes in for the hug, and she's like, uncomfortable. Now this time, she needs to uphold her boundaries. So what can she do? She can say, hey, listen, I told you last time that I don't feel comfortable with you just coming up to me and hugging me. So now I'm going to have to, tell someone that you've overstepped a mark here, or I'm going to have to just let you know that we can't be friends, okay? Because I'm not comfortable with this. I've already told you that I don't feel comfortable, and you've overstepped that boundary. And that'd be fair enough. Now, there are many other ways that, she can resolve this. Maybe she can hear him out or find out, what's going on. I told you about this. Why haven't you respected my boundary? But she's well within her rights to be able to uphold that boundary in whichever way she feels appropriate. And it's up to you how you wish to uphold your boundaries, right? There's no hard and fast rule. In the case of the traffic lights, one way is through a fine, one way is removing someone's license, one way is barring someone from driving for 2 weeks or whatever. There are many different ways to uphold a boundary, but the most important thing is that it is upheld. So, what have we discussed so far? Well, a boundary is not a boundary unless it has been established. So it's vitally important that you establish your boundary. That's number one. And number two, once you have established your boundary, it's very important that you think about measures that you're going to implement if your boundary is overstepped. And if it is overstepped, it's vitally important that you uphold your boundary. So there we are. 2 steps for why your boundaries are probably being crossed over and over again and what to do about it. Establish your boundary and then uphold your boundary if it is overstepped. If you took any value from that video at all, if there was anything in there that was perhaps new to you or maybe a new way of thinking about boundaries, please let me know by hitting that like button and subscribe. Hit the notification button, because as I say, I'm going to be sharing more videos about my personal insights, the way I see the world, right? I'll be sharing other content related to personal development, communication, and how to better relate with people. So if you like this video, stick around and I'll see you for the next one.